Well, good morning, everyone. I'm told I have to stay near this time, so we'll see how that goes if I use the stool. So, as Reverend Bunny said, the theme for this month is It Brings Forth Life, the Creative Power Within. And I did a visioning to help me prepare this message. And generally when I do a visioning, the last question is, is there anything else? And usually there isn't anything else. And this time there was. It was to look at the words. And I thought, well, maybe it's to look at, is there something going on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's to look at the words in the theme. And I thought, well, I've done that before with like creative and creativity and with power. And I knew I wasn't going to do it with life because I've looked up the word life in the dictionary years ago, and it's a circular definition. It says something about, like the aspect of biological organisms, and bio is just the Greek word for life. And actually, I did this years ago when I had my first job, and I was talking to somebody about that. For some reason, we had weird conversations where I worked back then. And I said, you look up the word life, and it doesn't really, it's just circular. And he said, well, what were you looking for? And I paused just to savor it long enough to not ruin the timing, and then said, the meaning of life. And he groaned appropriately, and so I knew that wasn't one I was going to really delve into much in terms of meaning. And then I thought, well, maybe it's looking at the words in the visioning. And the moment I did that, one of the words stuck out, the word freedom. And so I'll be addressing freedom in regards to the theme and to the other things that are in this message. So the creative power within. Well, when you think of creative power, let's see how this is going to go. When you think of creative power and creation, you can go to the book of Genesis. The beginning of it is, of course, a creation story. And in the first sentence it says, the Spirit of God moved upon the waters. And often you'll see in a footnote that what's called the Spirit could also be called wind of God or the breath of God, because it's all the same word. It's all the word ruach. And I think that the image of it being wind or breath brings more to mind. It's over the surface of the waters, and so that wind blowing over the surface starts movement, starts activity going. Because, our modern notion of spirit is more like vague, and you don't really get a good image of it. So that notion of it being wind. And when Randy Granger was here, he talked about the creation, the Hopi creation story, how the injunction was to fill the earth with life, with sound, with movement. And again, that sound and that movement is the sound and the movement of the wind. And in fact, when Randy was here, he demonstrated for us all manner of different flutes. Randy's just an amazing musical talent. I doubt that there's any musical instrument he can't just pick up and do. He's just amazing. And all these flutes, when he did that, it sunk into me that among the earliest musical instruments were wind instruments. Again, that sharing in the movement and the sound and the activity of wind, of spirit, was one of the earliest things that people chose to do. When we say the words, the phrase, to be filled with spirit, I think a lot of people will think of it as like a cup is filled with water. Bless you. But I think maybe it's more like when a flute is filled with the breath, or when instead of a cup being filled with water, a sponge is filled with water. It just permeates it all over. Or speaking of breath, when your lungs are filled with breath, lungs are not just sacs that hold the breath. They're actually sponges that hold the breath. And they don't just hold it, of course. We take the oxygen, the vital part of that breath, and we circulate it all through our body. And every cell contains, as I say, the vital part of each breath, the vital part of spirit. And so to be filled that way with spirit is, I think, a good way to think of it, a good image to have, a good thing to meditate and ponder on, rather than this sort of separate thing. Well, there's the cup and there's the spirit. There's the cup and there's the glass. Now, the book of Genesis goes on. After the wind starts stirring things up, God says, in English, let there be light. And in the English language, the word be, the verb to be, is what's called a defective verb. And it's called that because all the different inflections of it have nothing to do with each other. They all come from different things. So you don't see the connection between like the word was and the word am, and the word shall and the word be. They're all sort of disjointed. But in the Hebrew language, they're not. And when one reads some of the things in Hebrew, especially I think when one is not all that versed in it, one starts to see the connection between the different aspects, the different inflections of the verb to be. And one of the inflections is the name of the God of the Bible, that's spelled Yud, He, Vav, He, it's 4 letters. And another inflection of that is the first word that is spoken. It's not a few words, let there be, it's a simple word, Yehi. And the connection between them becomes more clear when you read it in the original. And that Yehi is the first word. It's what brings about the first thing that's created. And it's 3 letters, Yud, He, Yud. When Randy was here, he talked about the first primordial sound that some of the, I'll say American Indians, because he talked about the Indians, had, and it was the same sound, that Om, that he spelled with 3 letters, A-U-M. And this is the way often that, of course, in the Hindu language, in the Sanskrit, it's just a single symbol, but when they spell it out in English, it's often A-U-M, not the O-M. And Joseph Campbell remarks on that, how the 3 letters A-U-M correspond to the 3 deities of the Hindu Trinity, the Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the one who ends it, the destroyer. And those 3 letters correspond to that. The ah is when you're first opening your mouth and the sound starts out, that ah. That corresponds to Brahma, the creator. And then as long as you maintain that sound, that's what flows into the oo, that's Vishnu, the preserver, the one who keeps things going. And then the final M is what stops it, and that's Shiva. And what Joseph Campbell says is the way that it's actually, when you think of the Om that way, you don't hum that final M as we tend to do. It's more like Om, and the M just stops it, because that's Shiva ending it. And he says actually there are 4 parts to the Om. There are those 3, and then the silence that encircles it, the silence that out of which comes the next cycle, the next creative cycle of Om, of Brahma starting things and Shiva ending it. And I thought of that cycle of creation, that circle of life, in respect to something that Reverend Bonnie spoke about. She came back from the gathering, and she said, someone said to hospice what is ready to die, and to midwife what is ready to be born. So there's that Shiva, okay, that's done, and then the silence, and then something new, ready to be born. When she said it, it reminded me of something that a NLP teacher, Michael Breen, said once. He said that he had a number of guitars in his house. He had played guitar in his younger days, and he had collected 2 or 3 or 4, I don't know how many, guitars, with the intention of someday getting back to the guitar. And at a certain point in more recent years, when there were a lot more candles on the cake, he looked around and he realized, am I ever really going to get to the guitars? Because at a certain point he realized I have all these things I want to do. I've got to hospice some of them. I have to say, okay, look at this dream. Is it really ever going to happen? Am I going to devote the time and the effort necessary for it? And if not, to give it a decent burial, to mourn it properly, to let go of it, to have the sadness of saying, well, I'm just not going to do that. And then to let it go, to make room for the things he could do. You haven't got room for all, there's more to do than can ever be done. At a certain point, you got to start choosing. You got to start saying, okay, this, I'm doing that. I've got more candles on the cake than I used to have, and I'm starting to look at some of the things that have been on the back burner and saying, well, are they ever going to go to the front burner, or should I just, clean out that pot so that I have room and I have time for these other things? And there's a certain, I think when something's been on the back burner for a long time, there's a certain sadness, there's a certain, I won't say suffering, but maybe I will, associated with keeping it on the back, and you just haven't got, you haven't got time for that, you haven't got room for that. You move that off the back burner so that you have time and you have room for the things that you actually still think you can get going. These things that are on the back burner, these things that ought to be hospice, they actually limit our freedom. You think, well, you have freedom because you have all these things to choose from. But at a certain point, because you're investing a certain amount of mental energy, emotional energy, maybe even a little bit of time every now and then to those things, they actually limit your freedom to do the things that you might actually be still capable of doing once you limit, once you pare down, once you prune this vast tree of things that you want to accomplish. Author Stephen Pressfield, he's a best-selling author of fiction. He also wrote a number of nonfiction books, mostly about one of them was called The War of Art. And that's about the struggle that one encounters in any creative endeavor, in any creative enterprise. And he says somewhere in that book, do it or don't do it. This is different from the Yoda thing, there is no try. This isn't, don't even try. It's like, if you're not going to do it, then don't do it, and get on with things again. And as I say, I think that's a good thing to consider. Like, what are those things that have been on the back burner for so long that you're never going to get to them? So that you can make room for the things that you do still think you're going to get to. So I would offer that to you as something to meditate on, something to think about. Two of the, gosh, I wish I could move around. Two of the things that, I'll at least stand up. Two of the concepts that come up often in personal development, in spiritual development, are the notions of purpose and of truth. Truth was another one of those words that came up in the visioning. And often what you hear said about them is that your purpose is out there somewhere, and it's, you got to go find it, you have to discover it, you have to look for it. And the thing that you will quite often hear about truth is this notion of to define your truth, to come up, to say what's true for you. And I would like to have us consider hospicing, sacrificing to Shiva, those ways of thinking about it, and instead reversing it, that we define our purpose, we create our purpose, and we discover the truth. And so I'm going to talk about those two things for a bit now. So, how many people here ever watched the show Battlestar Galactica? Yeah. We're all on this side, isn't it? It's a science fiction show, which you could tell by the name, even if you never saw it. And in Battlestar Galactica, there's this war going on between humanity and a group of robots that are called Cylons. And the creators of that show did something which I thought was really cool. In any war, what you tend to do is to come up with terms to disparage the enemy, something that you call them that isn't nice. And what the humans called these robots, these Cylons, they called them toasters. Because they're just machines, they're just toasters. Now a toaster has a purpose, right? What's the purpose of a toaster? Yeah, to make toast, not a trick question, it's to make toast. That's it, that's what it's there for. That's what a toaster exists for. It has no value outside of making toast. If tomorrow everybody in the world no longer wanted toast for the rest of their lives, every toaster in the world would be junk at that point. It would be garbage. It wouldn't have any purpose. It wouldn't have any meaning. We wouldn't keep them around. Because when you say that something has a purpose, then that's what it's here for. It's like a toaster. It has no other value outside of something other than itself. The value of a toaster is in the toast, not in the toaster itself. When Reverend Bonnie came back, she said that to complete this sentence from the gathering, I exist too. And my immediate response was, I exist to be here. That's it. I don't need to have another reason to exist. I'm not a toaster. You and I and all of us are not toasters. We don't have to have some reason other than their existence to exist. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have to add something on. A purpose that we define, that we decide on, that we want to accomplish. But that's extra. It doesn't diminish our value or our worth. Say that, I think that, as odd as it may sound, the good news is you don't have a purpose. We don't have a purpose. To be here is good enough. It's valuable enough. Any purpose that you add on to that, that's great. That's icing on the cake. So we don't have to discover our purpose, go out and look for it, try and find it. We can define it. You create your mission statement. Create even when you were here, Bonnie, you said you decided what your purpose is. You didn't have to go out and find it. You took it on. You said, this is what I'm deciding. Now, the other thing I want to discuss again is this notion of truth. When Reverend Bonnie was here, she read something, I think, from Science Mind magazine. Someone said, defining truth for yourself is a worthy endeavor. And I heartily disagree. I think defining truth for yourself is a specious endeavor. It's a worthless endeavor. It's a dangerous endeavor. We say that the law is no respecter of persons. There's not one law for you and another law for me. It's the same with truth. Truth is no respecter of persons. There's not one truth for me and another one for you. Truth is universal. This notion of something being true for me, what is my truth, I think leads to a whole lot of discord and a whole lot of the problems that we have. Someone could say, pacifists are unpatriotic. Well, no, Tom, that's not true. It's my truth. It's true for me. Police are all thugs with badges. Hey, Fred, that's not true. It's my truth. It's true. Where does that get you to define truth that way? Let alone like with more, let's say, independent things like Mr. Smith, your check bounced. Oh no, my truth is that there was money in the bank. Not going to work. Just not going to work at all. To say that we have the right to define what truth is for each of us, I think that's la-la land. And you might think again that, well, if I'm free to define the truth, that's more freedom for me. No, it's actually a cage. Because now you're imprisoned by your own opinions, by your own prejudices, by your own daydreams, rather than being free and open to discover what the truth actually is in the cases where there are truth. Because a lot of times, truth isn't even the right word to apply. Like if I say, pizza is yummier than ice cream. Is that true? Is that not true? It's neither. To say that that statement is true or to say it's not true is to say that that is just as irrelevant as to say that statement is green or it's not green. The words don't apply. But we do get caught up in that. We think that when we state an opinion, when we give it the imprimatur of truth, we've then sort of dug in rather than saying, well, this is my opinion, this is my taste, these are my values. Yes, you can define your values, but not your truth. You know, there's a saying, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but no one's entitled to their own facts. No one's entitled to their own truth. The quote went on to say, when you define what is true for you, everything that does not serve your truth will fall away. And it sounds really, when you hear it, until you think about it. You know, as I say, the guy who said, well, it's true for me that there's money in the bank, the fact that there isn't money in the bank doesn't serve that, but it doesn't fall away. Or especially when we interact with people. You know, you have an employer and an employee, and the employer's truth is that this employee isn't working hard enough. And the employee's truth is that the employer is working them too hard. What's going to fall away? Right? Yeah, but that's because they're still defining those as truths rather than trying to find some accommodation. Once you get out of that dug-in trench of this is the truth, this is my truth, so it's the truth, then you can talk, then you can converse, then you can have a discussion, a conversation, and you can work things out. If each person defines his or her own truth, how on earth can you have a world that works for everyone? Can't be done. When, after all, the saying is, the truth shall make you free. Your truth won't. Your truth won't. Whenever Ernest Holmes talks about truth, he never talks about an individual truth. He never talks about personal truth. He always talks about universal truth. That's where the teaching lies. That's where the freedom lies, in discovering universal truth. And the law will obey us as we first obey it. One of his phrases. Reverend Bonnie quoted in that same talk, from Ernest Holmes, all that is in line with the truth must prosper. Not your truth, the truth. So, circling back to this notion of life, when I first saw the theme for this month some time ago, I looked at that, brings forth life. I remember that phrase, to have life more abundantly. And when I first encountered that phrase, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Because isn't life either or? Isn't it, well, this is alive, this is not alive. You know, there's no measure of it. There's no more, there's no less, so there's no more abundantly. And that's really how I thought about it for some time. It's like, what on earth does this mean? And so I tried to find the source, and it's in the book of John. And I thought, well, maybe from context that would help me, but it didn't really, because the context is one of these discourses that John really has that he puts into the mouth of Jesus that's, let's say, less than charitable toward people that John is less than charitable toward. And so it's just in the middle of it, out of nowhere. And so that context didn't help me, so I just sort of went back to, well, what would it mean to have life more abundantly? And I thought recently about what I said at the beginning about when you take in that breath and that vital energy, the oxygen goes into each cell, and what each cell is doing. Well, each cell can do more. It can be more active or less active. It can have more of the oxygen. It can have more of the other nutrients that it needs, and then have more of the activity that is that movement, that spirit. So yeah, okay. So in that sense, I can get what it means to have life more abundantly, to have more of that going on. And so with that in mind, I'd like to try something here. If you can have more life or less life, or you can feel that you have more life or less life, well, imagine, how much, if you were to measure it. How much, so actually, take your hands and sort of like go back and forth until you And don't elbow your neighbor or anything, but how much life do you have right now? Just feel it until you get to where you think it is. And then once you do, sort of like have, well, what's in there? Is it like maybe a balloon that's been, with that breath, that spirit in it again? And then once you do that, make it big. Once you've got it to where you think it is, start making it bigger. Have it expand. More in there. And if you do that, how does that feel? How many of you feel like, oh yeah, I have more life now? I feel more life when I just do that. That's part of that creative power that we have. That power. The metaphors that we use are actually metaphors, the way we represent things to ourselves. And so that works not just with anything that you can think of you have or don't have a quantity of. How much willpower do I have? Right. Well, I only have this much. Now you have more. Now it's a real. The other metaphor that we use is say something is low. People sometimes say they have low self-esteem, low energy, low vitality, and I have done this with people. I will say, how low? Point how low? Like it's a gas gauge. How low? Okay, it's this low. Raise it. Just see whatever's going on underneath. If you want something like pushing it up or however, raise it up. Raise your self-esteem. Raise your vitality. And it works. It's amazing that it works, but it does, because that's the way our heads think. We think in terms of symbols, and by manipulating the symbols, we manipulate how we think about it. Resolve it into thought. Never mind, you get that. So I offer that to you. It's simple, it's easy, it's quick, it's something you can always do, unless, there's people around looking at you funny, but even then, so what? If you feel low in some way, how low? Raise it up. So I offer that to you. It really, really does work. And so it does, and so it is.